When we first start delving into photography and learning about all the different elements of this craft, sooner or later we will come across composition. Now, to some people, composition will come naturally, whereas to others, like myself, we'll have to actively work at it in order to improve our compositing or composition skills. On our journey learning about composition, we will come across certain rules and certain theories that I'm sure you've heard 100 times, such as the rule of thirds or the spiral. I'm sure there are a few others, I just can't remember them right now. And to get us going, this is fantastic because it gives us a very clear rule where to place the subject, where to place certain aspects of the image in order to make a, let's say, correct composition of your photo. However, over time, as we start to improve our skills, we'll also start questioning some of these rules. I mean, why do we put things in a bottom third? On top of that, you'll come across photos which, no matter how hard you try to make them work correctly as per the rules, they just don't look right. And sometimes you can't quite understand why they don't look or feel right, even though technically they are correctly composed. And in this video, I want to share with you my approach to composition, which I believe goes beyond the typical rules, and it will give you a very solid and comprehensive framework as to the different elements of composition that go into the image, therefore give you a lot more of a deeper understanding of this approach to composing, and hopefully will really help you out. Before getting into the details, let me quickly talk about the typical elements that we would find in a scene that we're about to photograph. First of all, we have color. By that I mean bright, vibrant colors which jump out of the scene and catch your attention right away. So we can have things like bright red doors, bright green buses, or even a yellow structure that is being lit by the sun. Next up, we have highlights, and as the name suggests, these are the brightest parts of your image. It could be a foggy background, it could be a very bright midday sky, it could be a sun flare, it could even be a grey washed out sky that is still very bright. Also, don't forget the parts of the image which are being lit by the sun. So if you have a particular corner of the photo which is getting direct sunlight and is really bright, that also counts towards the highlights. Shadows are the total opposite of highlights, and in this particular case, the shadow element of your photo will be not so much invisible, but it'll be very difficult to pay attention to when you have all of the other things going on. It could literally be shaded areas, it could even be some midtones which are a little bit more subdued. Basically, if it doesn't grab your attention straight away and you have to look for it, I would say it falls under the shadow area. Other elements will include a lot of detail in a very small space. It could be a bunch of people together, it could be a bunch of different elements of a city, or let's say a very intricate architecture of a building. A bunch of small details when put together will come under this area. Basically, you'll be looking through the detail, a bit like looking for Where's Wally, and trying to see what is going on within that detail. And finally, we have negative space, and in the simplest form, it's a part of an image where there is absolutely nothing going on. Ideally, it will be the same kind of tonality, similar kind of hue, and it could be any part of the image. You can have like loads of sky, which is, let's say, blown out or the same color. You can have shadow, which is completely fallen to black, and again, it's the same color. Or it could even be a solid color, which is, again, the same color. Basically, anything which has no detail, nothing interesting going on, and it's almost there, like kind of filling a space. Now that we've covered what each element is, let's have a quick chat about the weight of each element in comparison to one another. What I mean by that is when you look at an image or at a scene, how much of your attention does each element take and how quickly does it take it in comparison to all the other elements in the frame. Another way to put it is that the more weight a particular element has, the more of your attention it will take, and the quicker it will take that attention. Bright and vibrant colors, especially reds, will have the most weight because they will take your attention almost immediately. If you look at a photo which has even a small red bright element, or to be honest, any other color, as long as it's vibrant and bright, your eyes will naturally go towards that color straight away. Just like color, the the highlights in your image will command the most weight and will definitely take most of your attention. As a rule of thumb, the brighter the area, the more attention it will take. And it will be kind of similar to color. The only exception is if you do have a very bright area that's also vibrant, then that will take obviously more attention than the color or the highlights on their own. When it comes to negative space and details, I've batched them together because for the most part, I feel they will hold a similar kind of weight and take the similar kind of attention as long as the hue, saturation and luminance is roughly about the same. Sure, there will be a few cases where one will definitely be stronger than the other. However, I don't think that happens all too often and you'll just have to play it by ear. Now, these will hold less attention than the highlights and the bright areas. However, they'll still hold more attention than the shadows that I'll talk about in a minute. The reason for it is because when we see a negative space, initially it's a little bit uncomfortable and we want to figure out why that negative space is there, what's filling it, why it's filling that space and what could be behind it. However, on the other hand, when we have loads of detail, as I've mentioned earlier, we could almost treat it like a game and try and always play like, let's find something interesting within all this detail and closely start paying attention to all the intricate little bits and bobs within the scene. And finally, we have the boring shadow areas of the image, which will fall all the way to the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to getting your attention. The main reason for it is because all your attention has already been spent on the more interesting elements, and there's just nothing super eye-catching or very interesting within the shadow areas, so you'll probably get to them last if you get to them at all. Now that we've covered each element in greater detail, it's time to talk about how they all interact with each other and ultimately how you can combine them together to create a balanced or a well-composed image. The key word here is balanced. Whenever I look at composing a photo, I first look and see if the scene is balanced. Does the image feel bottom heavy or top heavy? Is the image pulling you to the left or to the right? Or is the image feeling comfortable for you to look at without feeling like you're gonna fall to one particular side, or one particular side of the image takes most of your attention? And this is where the different weights of the elements come in. So for example, if you have a very small, bright and saturated area of the image, you will need a slightly larger shadow area to balance it out, because as we've spoken earlier, the shadow will have less weight than the highlight. The bigger the highlight, the bigger the shadow area in proportion will have to be to balance it out. In the same way, if you have loads of detail going on in one part of the image, you will need some negative or some, let's say, simpler space within the photo to balance it out so that it's not too overwhelming. Another analogy I would like to make is when it comes to dressing. So for example, if you wear a t-shirt that has loads of patterns, loads of details or writing, you will have to wear shorts or trousers which are a little bit cleaner and more simple, ideally just one shade, and vice versa. Because if you wear a very in-your-face loud Hawaiian t-shirt and a very similar design pants, then it will just look a bit overwhelming, a bit ridiculous and a little bit too much. Sure, in one or two cases it might work, but for the most part, it will just be a bit overwhelming. And same with photos. If, let's say, you have a very bright red bus, you will need a much larger, quieter, let's say more shadowy area to balance that out. So when you look at composing the photo, all you're trying to do is effectively place these elements around the image in a certain particular size so that neither element feels too heavy, because quite the opposite, you can have a very large shadow area. However, if the highlight area of your image is not big enough to balance it out, then the shadow area will take most of your attention. And if there's nothing interesting going on there, then overall you're not going to really get anything out of the photo. If all of this still sounds a little bit confusing, let's quickly run through a few examples and I'll show you what I mean. So let's look at the first example, which is a photo I took in Moore, London last winter. There's a building with a red wall that just gets lit up at midday, looks really cool. Basically, what we've got going on here is we've got a very bright and colorful area of the image, which you can see, you can see right here. And then we have the negative space, which is on the right hand side that you can see here. If we take the negative space out and we just have the image like so, as you can see, it feels very heavy to the left hand side. There's nothing on the right apart from the guy and a bit of negative space that's kind of anchoring it, and overall my eyes are drifting to the left. However, if I zoom out, you have a bit more negative space on the left hand side, which is kind of ending the frame, and overall the image feels balanced. The opposite can also be said, where if I remove too much of the guy there, now my eyes naturally just go to the negative dark area on the right hand side of the image. For this next example, we are staying in More London, and this was a very beautiful spring sunrise. So what do we have going on? Well, first of all, we've got Tower Bridge on the left hand side, we have City Hall on the right hand side balancing it out. We have a very vast highlight and sort of dead space area, which is the sky, and we have enough shadow and detail in the lower part of the image to balance that out. So overall, as it stands, in my opinion, this image is balanced. However, if we pretend that we didn't have City Hall in the photo and I just zoom in and crop in like so, straight away this image just feels a bit off. First of all, you've got this dead area here, which is taking all your attention straight away. And then if you look at Tower Bridge, it feels like it's about to fall off to the left hand side. So straight away I look here, which is the highlight, and then I look at the bridge and my eyes kind of just roll off to the side. If I zoom out now, then the City Hall on the right hand side is anchoring the photo and almost bringing your attention back to the right hand side of the image, therefore balancing it out. For the next example, we're going to Bank. This was last winter. Bank is one of my favorite places to shoot. You have really nice light and very clean lines on a sunny day. This is just one of those examples. So what do we have going on? Well, first of all, we've got a very nice highlight and detailed area in the top left, and we have a shadowy area and slightly more kind of dead spacey area in the bottom right. As it stands, the two balance each other out very well. However, if I were to, let's say, modify it, and let's say we did something like this, as you can see, it's just so bottom heavy that your eyes are just going straight to the shadow. On the other hand, if I moved it around and done something like this, the total opposite is happening, where your eyes are just going straight to the highlights and then kind of just rolling off the frame to the top left. And by having it properly exposed like this, the shadow area, which has less going on, balances out the highlighted area, which has a little bit more going on. And for the final example, we are on Bread Street, which is again in the winter. We're getting that amazing light. So Bread Street is just near One New Change, near St Paul's. That whole area gets really good light, and it's one of my favorite places to shoot in London. So right here we have quite a fair bit going on, so let's quickly explain it, get my marker pen out. So first of all, we have a very bright colourful area on the left hand side. We also have quite a fair bit of detail, which is these four guys walking that trolley. On the right hand side, we have a bit more open space, but also less interesting colours and a little bit of detail as well. Overall, the detail and the less, let's say, colourful parts of the image on the right hand side balance out the slightly quieter area and the brighter colour on the left hand side. If, for example, now I cropped it in something like this, as you can see, now the image just wants to fall to the left hand side. Straight away your eyes look to the left, but there's nothing quite on the right to balance that out. So the image, if I look at it from a distance, feels very left heavy. If I then zoom back out, you have all of that darker area on the right hand side to effectively pull your attention back to the other side of the image, therefore creating a balanced image on both sides. Although this is the primary way of me composing photos, there are three little tricks and little techniques that I keep in the back pocket and always try to apply to most of my photos. The reason I've not mentioned them in this video in more detail is because you would have heard of them thousands of times, and I'll just be repeating what everyone else says, and in principle they are very simple, so we'll cover them very quickly right now. First up, we have leading lines, and as the name suggests, they're any elements of the photo which will lead your eyes to the subject. Even though it's a very powerful tool, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because if your leading lines are not actually taking you to the subject, they can completely ruin the photo, and even in some cases, as I'll show you in a minute, take your eyes out of the frame entirely. Let me show you a few examples. So for the first example, we have these two people with an umbrella walking along an extremely wet day. This was not the day that broke my camera, actually. This was 2 days after it got fixed, and this time I also had an umbrella, so I prepared. But anyway, leading lines. There are 2 or 3 or 4 major leading lines in this photo. So first of all, we have the railings on the left hand side, taking your eyes straight to the person on the left. Same can be said for the actual wall, which has its own lines. Finally, on the right hand side, we also have more leading lines, both in terms of that railing as well as the line painting on the ground. So in total, we have 4 or 5 different leading lines which are taking your eye straight to that subject. This example of leading lines takes us to One New Change shopping center. The subject is, of course, the silhouette of the guy in the hat, and leading lines are basically all of the bits of glass or the seams of the glass in the architecture which are all pointing down towards where he is. And the moment you look at the highlight area, your eyes then naturally roll down towards him because of the lines going down to the subject. As I've mentioned earlier, leading lines can also act in the opposite way and completely ruin the image by taking your eyes away from whatever it is that's in the image. This is a very clear example of that. It's a photo that I took on the North Coast 500 road trip, and I've completely messed it up, to be honest with you. So overall, it's a beautiful scene. We have ridiculously cool mountains, the weather was amazing, the light is spot on, and I couldn't be happier with the image from an aesthetic point of view. However, the biggest mistake we have here is that the actual interest in the photo are these mountains here. Okay, we have that little mountain on the right, but the main kind of in-your-face interest are the mountains towards sort of middle and left. However, the only real leading line, or there's 2 leading lines, is the road, which effectively takes you to the right side of the image, and then you have the lake, which effectively takes you again to the right side of the image and off the screen. So straight away, you don't even look at the mountains, you just look at the road, you look at the leading line from the lake, and before you know it, you're now looking at the right-hand side edge of the image, where arguably there's nothing interesting going on. And this image feels quite heavy to the right-hand side, even though, as I've mentioned before, weight-wise it's okay, all because the leading lines are just completely taking you away from the photo. Framing is another well-covered technique and is used all the time. As the name suggests, you take your subject or you take whatever is of interest in the photo and put it in a frame. The frame can be made up of any of the elements that you would see in the scene, and I'll show you a few examples now. The first framing example is a very traditional, very classic London shot, and it's a photo that everyone can relate to and everyone can do within reason wherever they live. It's not so much a street photo, but it's certainly more of a travel photo. It's basically the skyscraper, in this case the Shard, which is framed between the bridge or the walkway, the staircase on the top top left, and the bridge on the top left. So in total we have 3 elements which are darker, framing the Shard, and straight away it's obvious what the subject is and where you're looking at. Now you haven't got a person here, but to be honest, that person is only there kind of for scale. They're not the subject, they're not a point of interest at all. The main interest point is the Shard, which is bang in the middle and framed. Next up, we're going back to more London. We've used this example already before for composition, but now this is a very easy framing example because you have your subject bang in the middle, you have the framing on the right hand side, which is a dead space. You then have the framing on the left hand side, which kind of puts an end to the image. You have at the bottom a slightly darker area, and you have the shadow coming across the top, which basically creates a nice frame around where the subject is. very easy, probably the easiest framing example I can show you. And finally, we have foreground element, which is basically anything that goes between you, the photographer, and the scene, the subject, and whatever it is you're taking a photo of. The whole point is to put the viewer of your photo in your shoes so that they can pretend that they are standing in that scene. And the best way to do it is to include foreground, or as you might have heard, shoot through something. So a very easy example is if you're looking at a cityscape, you'll have a few out of focus elements at the bottom of the image, which will effectively complete the scene. The first foreground example is from Tower of London. I was walking around the tower and they had the soldiers marching downstairs. And rather than just looking out the window and taking a photo just by pointing my camera down, I included a bottom of the window frame, and therefore it's very easy to put yourself in that position of being in that building, because you can now get an idea of where you are. Without this window frame, if it was just those soldiers on their own, you will have no idea where I took the photo from. Is it even by me, or is it a drone that took the photo? I mean, obviously not a drone there, I'll probably just get shot, but in general, having this window frame just straight away puts you in this particular photo. The next example was taken from the back of the river taxi going away from Canary Wharf. The subject here was, of course, the really cool clouds in the back and the city, or the skyscrapers, against those clouds. However, if I just literally took a snapshot, it wouldn't really have the same kind of impact compared to if I included the two people that were standing either side, which not only have they framed the photo, but they also added perspective. So now you know that you're standing, let's say, on a platform or on a boat, and this is not like a drone shot or a composite or anything like that. Also, with the woman taking a photo of the scene, it really puts you in that particular scene, because, you know, we've all seen this scene many times over. So to summarize, when you first start photography, by all means use the rule of thirds, the spirals, and all the other tools that are commonly used to aid your composition. However, as you progress and as you start to question things more, and as you start to take photos which might not necessarily work with the traditional rules, this method, I feel, will definitely help you out, and it will certainly give you a much deeper understanding of all the elements in your frame and how you can compose them together so that the image at the end of the day is well balanced. Now, please leave your comments below, because I have not come across any other video or anyone else kind of explaining it in this way, so it would be interesting for me to hear if this makes sense to you. Certainly it's made sense on the workshops, because this is one of the main things I talk about on my one-to-one workshops. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for your attention, thank you for watching the video, and I look forward to reading your comments. I hope you have a fantastic day, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!